February 3, 1998. In the execution chamber, a woman named Karla Faye Tucker was preparing to face her death. 14 years earlier, she had used a pickaxe to kill 2 people in a murderous frenzy. Her story is not just an indictment of a crime. It is a shocking journey of transformation from a lost soul destroyed by drugs and violence to a devout believer who found salvation behind bars. Her last meal, surprisingly simple, with a banana and a salad, was as strange as her confession itself. Was Karla's repentance genuine, and does justice allow for mercy? Her final words just before the lethal injection was administered would force us to question the fragile line between a sinner and a saint, between punishment and compassion. This is the haunting and controversial legacy of Karla Faye Tucker. The following content contains elements of violence and is based on a true crime. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. This horrific case originated on a fateful night, June 13, 1983, in an apartment in Houston, Texas. Karla Faye Tucker, then 23, along with her boyfriend Daniel Ryan Garrett, 35, broke into the home of a man named Jerry Dean with the intent of stealing a motorcycle. But the theft quickly turned into a bloodbath. Jerry Dean and another woman, Deborah Ruth Thornton, were brutally murdered with a hammer and a pickaxe. The brutality of the crime shocked the entire state of Texas and etched Karla Faye Tucker's name into the history of American jurisprudence. A small detail, but one that will become incredibly important, later in the story, Karla claimed she used a set of keys she had found after her friend Sean Dean had lost them. Remember this detail, it will reveal much about her plan. No. The pickaxe, an ordinary work tool found leaning against a wall in the apartment, would also become a haunting piece of evidence, a symbol of the transformation from a simple theft into a murderous rage. Based on what happened, what do you think Karla's true motive was? Was it just a robbery that went wrong, or was there another conspiracy hidden behind it? The subsequent investigation would peel back the complex layers of the case, but the final answer perhaps went with Karla to her grave, leaving behind a profound question about the boundaries between crime repentance and redemption. To understand the abyss that swallowed Karla Faye Tucker, we must go back in time to look at 2 parallel lives, one of the perpetrator and one of the victim, 2 lines that seemed destined never to cross but were bound together by a tragic fate. In one corner of the picture, we have Deborah Ruth Thornton. She was not a complicated character. The night before she was murdered, Deborah had an argument with her husband. To clear her head, she went to a party, and in a random twist of fate, ended up sleeping over at the home of a friend, Jerry Dean. She had no idea it would be her final resting place. Deborah's life, like that of any ordinary person, had its own joys and sorrows, but it was abruptly cut short by an event in which she had no part. She was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Meanwhile, on the other side of Houston, Karla Faye Tucker's life was a long series of tragedies and wrong choices. Born on November 18, 1959, Karla was the youngest of 3 sisters. Her father, Larry, was a longshoreman. Her parents' marriage was tumultuous. At just 8 years old, Karla began smoking with her sisters. The real tragedy struck when she was 10. During her parents' divorce, Karla discovered a painful truth: she was the result of her mother's extramarital affair. This emotional wound became a bottomless pit in the young girl's soul. By age 12, Karla had delved into drugs and sex. 2 years later, at 14, she dropped out of school and followed her drug-addicted mother, Carolyn, a rock groupie, into prostitution. Karla's life consisted of long trips with legendary bands like the Allman Brothers Band and the Eagles, not as a fan, but as part of the dark underworld behind the stage. At 16, she had a brief marriage to a handyman named Stephen Griffith. Soon after, she fell into the world of bikers, tough men living outside the law. It was in this environment that she met Sean Dean, and later Sean's husband, Jerry Dean. In 1981, this couple introduced Karla, then 21, to Daniel Ryan Garrett, a 35-year-old man. This relationship became the final catalyst, pushing Karla to the brink of an unforgivable crime. 2 lives won of Deborah Thornton, a woman just looking for a place to sleep after a family argument, and one of Karla Tucker, a woman who had been battered by life since she was a child, finally intersected in a fateful bedroom. But there was one detail about Deborah Thornton that not even her family knew, a small secret that reveals the cruelty of fate, which we will explore later. Karla Faye Tucker's childhood was not merely unhappy, it was a detailed map leading to tragedy. Discovering she was an illegitimate child at age 10 was not just a shock, it shattered her foundational understanding of family and identity. According to criminal psychologists, deep childhood trauma, especially rejection from family and a sense of not belonging, are often core factors in the formation of a deviant personality in adulthood. Karla had no positive role models. Her mother, instead of being a protector, was the one who led her into prostitution. The escalation of Karla's behavior is an almost classic pattern. It all began with small rebellious acts, like smoking, then quickly spiraled into heavy drug abuse, dropping out of school, and finally crime. If we were to draw a visual timeline of Karla's life, we would see a steep downward slope, smoking at 8, drugs at 12, prostitution at 14, and becoming a murderer at 23. Each stage was a further slide into darkness, with no breaks, no intervention. There were at least 5 clear warning signs that society and those around her missed. In Karla's case, early substance abuse, dropping out of school, a history of family instability, and abuse association with criminal groups, and a complete lack of a social or family support system. These signs, when appearing together, form an almost certain recipe for disaster. Karla's tragedy lies not only in the crime she committed, but also in the fact that the path to that crime was paved with the bricks of indifference, abuse, and despair. On the night of June 13, 1983, after days immersed in drugs, Karla and her boyfriend Danny Garrett decided to act. Along with a friend named James Lee Brandt, they drove to Jerry Dean's apartment complex. Lee Brandt testified that he was tasked with looking for Dean's El Camino while Karla and Garrett went inside. From Karla's perspective, it was a simple plan. She had a key, which she lied about having found. They would go in, steal the motorcycle Dean was repairing, and disappear. But once inside, the plan began to fall apart. From the victim, Jerry Dean's perspective, he was sound asleep in his bed when he suddenly felt someone on top of him. It was Karla. Acting on self-defense, Dean struggled and grabbed her arm. Immediately, Danny Garrett, who was standing nearby, intervened. Garrett grabbed a ball-peen hammer from the floor and repeatedly struck Dean in the back of the head. A horrific gurgling sound began to come from Dean's throat as he faded into death. Garrett then left the room to start moving motorcycle parts outside. At this point, the story shifts to the perspective of an unwilling witness, Deborah Thornton. Hiding under the covers against the wall, she had witnessed the entire event in horrified silence. She hoped she wouldn't be discovered, but then, left alone in the room with the dying Jerry Dean, Karla became obsessed with the sound he was making. She later testified that she wanted to make him stop making that noise. She looked around and saw a 3-foot pickaxe leaning in the corner. She grabbed it and began to strike Dean repeatedly. It was then that Karla discovered someone else was hiding under the blanket. Deborah Thornton's life ended here. Karla swung the pickaxe at her. A brief struggle ensued before Garrett returned and separated them. But it was too late. Karla, in a fit of extreme rage, repeatedly attacked Deborah, finally embedding the axe deep in her heart. Later, in her shocking confession, Karla recounted that she had experienced multiple intense orgasms with each blow of the pickaxe. From the family's perspective, the next morning, a co-worker of Jerry Dean, who had come for a ride to work, entered the apartment and discovered a horrific scene. 2 bodies lay in pools of blood, the room ransacked. His call to the police initiated an investigation that would shake the entire United States. If you were Deborah Thornton, hiding under that blanket and witnessing everything. What would you do in that moment? Try to run, remain absolutely silent, or try to fight back? It is a question none of us would ever want to answer. The investigation began immediately. Based on the crime scene, police quickly determined this was not a random killing. The theft of the motorcycle was a crucial clue. It showed that the perpetrator knew Jerry Dean and what was valuable in his apartment. Investigators began to map out Dean's relationships, especially in the biker world, a fairly closed community. Forensic technology at the time was not as advanced as it is today. There were no rapid DNA tests or extensive CCTV systems. They had to rely on traditional methods, collecting fingerprints, analyzing bloodstains, and most importantly, interrogating witnesses. Each piece of evidence was meticulously collected and analyzed. The ball-peen hammer and the pickaxe were identified as the murder weapons. The position of the bodies and the brutality of the wounds indicated an extreme rage far beyond what was necessary for a robbery. The name James Lee Brandt, the man who accompanied Karla and Garrett to the scene, but did not go inside soon, appeared on the interrogation list. His testimony, though perhaps incomplete, pointed the finger directly at Karla and Garrett. But the investigators had no idea that the perpetrator herself was about to hand them the most damning evidence. In the weeks following the crime, Karla Faye Tucker, perhaps out of guilt or a morbid need to boast, couldn't keep quiet. She began to brag about her accomplishments to friends and relatives. Rumors spread quickly in the underworld. Within just 5 weeks, those boasts reached the ears of the police. The investigation had a breakthrough. Karla and Garrett were arrested in July 1983. After their arrest, Karla and Garrett did not flee or try to hide their crimes. The 5-week period between the murders and their capture was not a dramatic international manhunt. Instead, it was a time when the net of the law slowly closed in around them. The Houston police worked systematically, following leads from Jerry Dean's acquaintances. They interviewed Sean Dean Jerry's estranged wife and Karla's friend. They spoke to people in the biker community. Gradually, the picture of that horrific night became clearer. Karla and Garrett, meanwhile, continued their lives immersed in drugs, perhaps believing they would never be caught. They made a fatal mistake that many criminals make: they talked too much. There were at least 3 times Karla was nearly exposed. The first was when she boasted to a friend right after the crime. This person was shocked, but did not report it to the police out of fear. The second was when a relative overheard the story and nearly called the authorities. The third and final time was when one of the people who heard her story decided they could no longer remain silent and provided the information to an investigator. The wall of silence had crumbled. When the police moved in, neither Karla nor Garrett resisted. Their run from the law, if you can call it that, ended not on a highway, but right in the community where they lived. In September 1983, Karla Faye Tucker and Daniel Garrett were indicted for murder and tried separately. Karla's trial became a media sensation. Initially, she pleaded not guilty and was held in custody, awaiting trial. The prosecution's strategy was to portray Karla as a cold-blooded, brutal killer. They used her own boasts against her. Karla's confession, with the shocking detail of her experiencing orgasms with each swing of the pickaxe, became the most powerful evidence. It not only proved her criminal act, but also revealed a deviant and dangerous psychological state. The defense, in contrast, tried to build a different image. They argued that Karla was a product of an abusive childhood, that she acted under the heavy influence of drugs, and could not control her actions. They emphasized that, without the drugs, this crime would never have happened. This is a common strategy in criminal cases, aiming to mitigate the defendant's responsibility by blaming external factors like drugs or environment. However, in a Texas courtroom in the 1980s, sympathy for such arguments was scarce. The jury faced a difficult choice: to believe the story of a lost soul destroyed by drugs, or to believe the image of a cold-blooded monster depicted by her own confession. In the end, the brutality of the crime overshadowed everything else. In 1984, Both Karla Faye Tucker and Daniel Garrett were sentenced to death. Garrett died of liver disease in 1993 while awaiting execution. As for Karla, she began her 14-year journey on death row. Soon after her imprisonment, a significant event occurred that completely changed the trajectory of Karla Faye Tucker's story. She took a Bible from the prison ministry program and began reading it in her cell. She later recalled, "I didn't know what I was reading. Before I knew it, I was on my knees in the middle of my cell floor. I was just asking God to forgive me." In October 1983, Karla Faye Tucker became a Christian. This conversion became the center of a debate that lasted for the next 14 years. Was this a sincere repentance, a sinful soul truly finding salvation, or was it just a sophisticated strategy to manipulate the justice system and escape the death penalty? When analyzing her initial confession, forensic linguists pointed to a boastful tone, almost proud of her violent actions. The language she used showed no remorse. However, in later interviews and letters after her conversion, Karla's language changed completely. She used words of contrition, repentance, and faith. She repeatedly expressed her sorrow for what she had done to the victims' families. The contrast between these statements and the evidence of the crime created a major contradiction. Can a person change so profoundly and completely? Many believed it was possible. They pointed to the 14 years Karla lived as a model prisoner, helping other inmates and becoming a source of spiritual inspiration in the prison. In 1995, she even married her prison minister, Reverend Dana Lane Brown, by proxy. However, skeptics, including the prosecution and many members of the public, found this change too convenient. They argued that her crime was too heinous to be forgiven by words and faith alone. A simple public poll would show a deep division. Do you believe Karla Faye Tucker's repentance was sincere? The answer to this question would determine whether one saw her as a saint or a sinner. On February 2, 1998, 24 hours before the execution was to be carried out, the atmosphere at the Mountain View unit became tense. Karla Faye Tucker spent her last day with a surprising calmness. She spent time talking on the phone with loved ones, writing her final letters, and meeting with Reverend Dana Lane Brown, the husband she had never been able to touch outside of prison bars. The guards noted that her mood was very serene. She had accepted her fate. There was no panic, no desperate pleas. She seemed to have found an inner peace, whether real or feigned, that few could understand. Her last meal was served. Unlike the lavish requests of many other death row inmates, Karla's request was incredibly simple: a banana, a peach, and a garden salad with ranch dressing. This simplicity seemed to reflect the new person she claimed to have become, someone who had renounced worldly desires. The meal was served in her cell, and she ate it quietly. The final moment arrived. Karla was taken to the execution chamber at the Huntsville unit. The people she chose to witness her death included her sister Carrie Weeks, her husband Dana Brown, her close friend Jackie Onken, and a special figure, Ronald Carlson, the brother of victim Deborah Thornton. Initially, Ronald had supported the death penalty, but after a spiritual transformation, he changed his views and campaigned for clemency for the very woman who had killed his sister. Also present for the victims' families were Deborah's husband Richard Thornton and her son. When asked if she had any last words, Karla looked directly at the witnesses, smiled, and spoke clearly. "Yes, sir. I would like to say to all of you, the Thornton family and Jerry Dean's family, that I am so sorry. I hope God will give you peace with this." She looked at her husband. "Baby, I love you." She looked at Ronald Carlson. "Ron, give Peggy a hug for me." Then she looked at everyone present, still smiling through her tears. "Everybody has been so good to me. I love all of you very much. I am going to be face to face with Jesus now. Warden Baggett, thank all of you so much. You have been so good to me. I love all of you very much. I will see you all when you get there. I will wait for you." As the lethal drugs began to enter her system, Karla praised Jesus Christ, licked her lips, looked at the ceiling, and hummed softly. 8 minutes later, at 6:45 p.m. Central Time, Karla Faye Tucker was pronounced dead. With her death, a controversial chapter in Texas judicial history closed, but the questions it raised would linger forever. After the execution, Karla Faye Tucker's legacy continued to fuel debate. Her family, including her minister husband Dana Brown and her sister Carrie Weeks, continued to live quiet lives carrying the memory of the complex woman they loved. Ronald Carlson, the victim's brother, who had forgiven Karla, became a powerful voice in the anti-death penalty movement. But perhaps the most profound impact was on an unexpected person. Fred Allen, the captain of the Death House team at Huntsville, who had overseen more than 120 executions, including Karla's. A few days after carrying out her sentence, he had a mental breakdown. He resigned from his job, giving up his pension. He, a man who had once been a staunch supporter of capital punishment, had completely changed his mind. In a documentary years later, he said, "Nobody has the right to take another life. I don't care if it's the law, and it's so easy to change the law." Karla's case did not lead to major changes in legislation, but it ignited a national conversation about the role of gender religion and repentance in the criminal justice system. Unanswered questions remain. Was Karla's conversion truly sincere? If she had been a man, would her story have received as much attention and sympathy? And the biggest question of all, what is true justice? Is it commensurate punishment, or is it the capacity to allow for redemption even for unimaginable crimes?